Welcome to episode 12 of the Stageworthy podcast. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. On Stageworthy, I interview people who make theater, actors, directors, playwrights, and more, and talk to them about everything from why they chose the theater to their work process and everything in between. You can find Stageworthy on Facebook and Twitter at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website at stageworthypodcast.com. If you like what you hear, I hope you'll subscribe on iTunes or whatever podcast app you use, and consider leaving a comment or rating. Ruth Lawrence is an actor, director, filmmaker, and artistic director of White Rooster Theatre. She's co-founder and coordinator of the Women's Work Festival, now celebrating 10 years of developing new plays by women. She was named the Newfoundland and Labrador Arts Council's Artist of the Year for 2011 and was honored with the Queen's Jubilee Medal in 2013. Ruth spoke to me from her home in St. John's, Newfoundland. Well, welcome to the show, and I'll start with the question that I always start with, and that is, why did you choose to pursue theater?
Well, I grew up in a really small place in St. Jack's, Newfoundland, which is in the middle of the south coast of Newfoundland, little town of 200 people. And I didn't really have any good examples of theater to use as my guide when I was growing up. But I did learn through CDC that we had a very vibrant culture, and there were tons of local regional programming happening in Newfoundland at that time. So I was used to seeing our culture kind of reflected back to us in shows like The Wonderful Grand Band, Up at Hours, Skipper and Company. Some of them were variety shows, some of them were sort of sitcoms, and some were music shows. So I sort of grew up seeing ourselves reflected on TV. And even though I'd never seen a theater show, I felt that there was a career out there for me. So once I started getting pretty late into high school, I started investigating the possibilities. And the first school that I could find that did not require an audition to get into, which really appealed to me because I didn't know what an audition was a technical theater school in Niagara College down in Welland. So I applied, wrote a really great letter, got some references, got in, and that was really the start to my theater career. Because from there, I was allowed to audition for all the shows that the center did. I had to be on crew sometimes, but by and large, I got to perform in those shows, and that was really the beginnings of my theater career. So really, my first experiences on stage were actually in Southern Ontario.
So you didn't have exposure to theater itself until you started like college.
Yeah, that's right. I had a high school teacher who came through at one point who was going to start a drama club, and we did one drama club sort of meeting, and we did some ragdoll exercises and stuff. I was so jazzed, and I thought, oh, this is going to be great. But I guess she didn't really see much potential there in the 4 or 5 of us who showed up, and we never had another drama club meeting. That was a bit of a disappointment to me, but I did get a taste, and it was enough to tell me that, yep, this was something I wanted to do.
Were you surprised when you finally started doing theater at what it actually meant?
I was, in a way, because, no matter what you grow up watching, you're never really quite prepared for the amount of work and the amount of thought that goes into a production. And no matter how big or small your part is, you're always on. You have to be thinking all the time. And so I think that was the part that surprised me. When you're watching TV, you kind of go, okay, when the person walks off, they're sort of out of your experience. But it's a very different, as we all know, when we work in theater, once the show starts, there is that wonderful, beautiful tension, no matter how often you are on or off the stage, that you're suspended in from the time the show goes up until the final curtain call.
Yeah. And
Those are beautiful moments. Actually, I love those moments.
yeah, so do I. You so doing theater at Niagara.
Mhm.
Um, did you complete the program there, or did you leave that to go elsewhere?
Surprisingly, I did because once I got there, I realized I loved the people. The students that were there doing technical theater loved their craft so much. And I ended up going, it was a 2-year program with an optional third. I went back for the second year that I had to choose a specialization. So I chose a specialization in costumes, even though I actually loved carpentry too. And my carpentry teacher was actually quite disappointed that I didn't become a carpenter. In retrospect, so am I, because it would have really helped me when I renovated my house. But I did learn a respect for power tools while I was there, and I've never been afraid to pick anything up. So
Hmm.
I took that with me, but I stayed because the first year I did 2 shows, and then I saw an opportunity in the next year to just get a bit more of an enriched experience, and I did. I did another show at the very final one that year was Absurd Person Singular, which was an Alan Ayckbourn show, but unlike most of the stuff that he's written. And I just had a ball. It was one of the best experiences of my, early college life because I had a lead role. My parents came to see me. As it turned out, it was the only time my father ever saw me on stage because he died quite young, got sick the next year, and died a year later. So it was the only time my father ever saw me on stage was that final production at Niagara. So I did actually really enjoy and never regret any of the time I spent there.
Hmm. And did you go straight from there to George Brown?
Well, I'd hoped to. I auditioned for George Brown because I went up for a visit to friends of mine who were at George Brown while I was still at Niagara. And I just fell in love with their program. I saw the period study, which is just, the pinnacle for me of the study at George Brown. And I saw that and thought, this is the school for me. I auditioned for that program and didn't get in. I got into Humber and went to Humber for 1 year. And the whole time I was at Humber, even though I learned lots and I made incredible friends, some of whom I'm still friends with today, of course, there was just something about George Brown. They hooked me. So I went back to audition again. And I remember Peter Wilde saying, "Didn't we see you last year?" Yeah, you did, but you didn't let me in the school. So I'm back. And he said, "Well, what if we're just another stepping stone on your way to find the school of your dreams?" And I said, "Well, this is it. I don't want to go anywhere else." And I think that actually got me in. I don't think
That
it was my
probably did.
audition.
That probably did.
Yeah, there's no way it was my audition. I didn't improve that much from 1 year to the next. I really think it was those words. He took a chance on me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was, I mean, though that program for so many people who went through it is pretty, it's an intense program and is definitely, it changes you in some good. And I guess some people, everybody's mileage varies, but it definitely is
Mhm.
a challenging course. Um,
Totally. I wouldn't change not 1 month, not one scene study, not one course, like everything about that. And like you said, there were things I didn't enjoy, but they came back to me, at some point in my career for the last 25 years. Those everything I learned there has come back to me in some way.
well, it's funny because it is a course that I remember when I was in first year, Peter Wilde said something to the effect of, "You may not understand the things that we're doing now, but one day in the future, you will understand exactly why we're doing it." And at the
Yeah,
time, I said, "You are so full of shit," is
I
what I thought to
know.
myself. And then about 10 years later, I was like, "Oh, now I
I
understand."
know the penny drops, and like that's the thing. Like the penny keeps dropping. I feel like like and it's true, eh? Like I remember having that moment too, where I was like, we're young and we're thinking, oh my god, really? Do we need to know this stuff? And yeah, the truth is, you do.
Well,
And
it's funny because I remember thinking, why are we spending all this time in theater history class? And,
exactly,
we're just
exactly.
being lectured at for an hour every week. But now, of course, I understand exactly why.
I know. And like I've gone back and reread so many of those plays. He'd be very proud of us, I think, Phil. He'd be very proud to hear that. But
I think
it's
so,
true.
yeah.
And I teach sometimes now. I've taught a couple of times at the theater school in Corner Brook. I've taught as a masterclass teacher, and I've also taught here at MUN in their drama specialization. And I hear myself saying the same words that those teachers have said over the years to me, and doing remarkably a lot of the same exercises.
Yeah. It's funny how much those are the exercises that we fall back on so often.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like I actually feel a little pang of jealousy when I'm teaching them to my students, because I want to go back and do it all over again.
I caught myself saying a little while ago that I would like to go back and do those things again, knowing what I know now.
Yeah.
Sort of with the wisdom of age and not the impatience of my youth.
I know. The zone of silence. Like, it would be so nice to go back there.
Yeah, it totally would. When you finished theater school, how long did you go straight back to Newfoundland, or did you stay in Ontario for a while?
I didn't go straight back because I auditioned for a couple of summer seasons, and I got one. So I actually left school and went directly to Port Colborne and worked at the Showboat Theater. I don't know if that theater's still there, but they had a little summer season, and I went down and worked there. I performed in 2 shows, and I think I was the costume mistress for one in the middle, because of course I had, the costume background. They're like, "Oh, we could keep you on the whole summer." And I went, "Yeah, of course." I was a new mother because I had Luke. And I thought, "Yeah, I'll do that." So I stayed that summer. And while I was in Port Colborne performing, a friend of mine came to visit me and told me about an audition for a show back in Newfoundland. And I knew at the time I'd planned to go back because me and my partner, Luke's dad, were getting married. So I thought, I should audition. So I set up an audition. I can't even remember how I did it. I feel like I had a phone interview, and she said, "Okay, yeah, you'll audition when you get back in St. John's." So I came back, I auditioned for her, and she said, "Well, the show's cast. I can't hire you." And I probably did the smartest thing of my career. I said, "Well, isn't your show about rural Newfoundland?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, who in your cast is from rural Newfoundland?" And she said, "No one." And I said, "I think you need me." And what could she say to that? She said, "Well, maybe. Okay, I'll do this. Why don't you come in and work with us for a couple of days? We'll try out. And if it works out, then I'll figure something out." And so after the end of the first day, I thought, "Oh, this is, I didn't know how this was going." And then I came back for my second day, and the assistant director said, Don't worry. Your trial's over. We're hiring you today." And that was it. Like I got that job, and then I went basically from job to job. I don't think I've ever auditioned for anything outside of Newfoundland since that, because one job led to the other, led to another. I made a whole community and network here. And the only time I've left here to do shows is when I've toured things. And one time I did a co-production between RCA Theatre, our local St. John's theatre company, and Tarragon. And I went to Tarragon to do 6 weeks in Toronto. So I've had a pretty full career here. I've been really lucky.
Yeah, I mean, there's you sort of mentioned something in passing about you mentioned your son Luke, and you had Luke. So you were pregnant with Luke in second year?
Yeah, I got pregnant in the fall of second year. So by the time I finished my second year, I was quite pregnant. And it just was very fortunate that his birth date was predicted to be July. It turned out to be perfect. He came on the 8th of July, and he was 6 weeks old when I went back for my third year. And I remember when I got pregnant, I think it was funny because I kept thinking, "Oh, they're all really skeptical. They think I'm not coming back." But at that point, as a pregnant young woman, 23 years old, I didn't really know what my options were because I thought, well, now I got to work as soon as I get out of school because I got a child to raise. So I didn't see any other choice than to finish school. So I told them I was going to come back, and they said, look, come back. And I remember Peter Wilde actually in the room. It was him and Heiner, and Peter said, I think you just need to come back and take it one day at a time and see what happens. And I said, yeah, if you'll let me do that, that's what I'd like to do. And he said, yeah, of course we will. And that's what I did. I never looked beyond the next day because every day getting to school was hard. That's no lie. Because I had, a child. I had my child's babysitter was across town. I lived in High Park. His sitter was lived in Gerard and where was she? Gerard and Coxwell. And then the school was at King and River. So I basically crossed the city and then doubled back halfway to get to school every day. And then I'd get home. So because I was in third year when I went back, we had classes all day and then rehearsals all night. So I would usually get home like at midnight because I'd go get Luke after rehearsal, usually at a student's house. A first or a second year would have him, or they'd come to the school and take care of him. And I was getting home at midnight and then getting up again like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. So every day it was hard. And, babies come with lots of illnesses and lots of needs. So I never quite knew what the next day would bring. I was also really broke. So I was doing my own laundry for cotton diapers, and I was nursing, and it wasn't an easy year. By the time the year was up, I was physically exhausted, but man, did I ever know myself better.
I'll bet you did.
I knew a lot more about myself than I would have in any, otherwise. That's for sure. Yeah. And I got better as an actor. There's no doubt about that, because suddenly there was just something, there's just something that makes you a lot less selfish when you realize that there's another person that depends on you.
That's true. I was actually going to suggest that maybe that might have also been because you were so tired.
And I was tired.
You cannot fake it when you're tired.
That's so true. And I'll tell you one thing, I was certainly in touch with my emotions. I always knew, and there were just things, there was an appreciation for life somehow that I hadn't had before, and how delicate it was. It sounds a little bit corny to say it, but there was something that changed entirely. I felt like my level of empathy went way up, and I suddenly could kind of put myself in someone else's shoes. And before that, I was concerned with all the things that a college student is concerned with, and many of those things really went to the back burner. When you got a child that's dependent on you every day, it just changed everything. And I'm telling you, for me, I say this a lot when I talk to theater students. Like, I had the best people around me at George Brown. Everyone there contributed in some way, whether it was just giving me the support or a kind word. I can't overstate it enough. Everybody there was just instrumental in me finishing that. And in some ways, I always felt like having a baby in the school kind of humanized everyone. A lot of the pettiness that I'd sort of seen in years ahead of me, it all fell away. I didn't see that anymore once a baby was suddenly around. And that was a really great effect. I saw it in everybody from my third year class to second years and first years too, because a lot of times, like, you might have even held Luke. I felt like everybody in that school had a hand in kind of doing something at some point.
Everybody, I think, took a turn looking after him. I remember. Definitely. I or somebody else might have commented that year Luke was the baby that was raised by the community.
Oh my God, absolutely! There were times when I'd be doing shows that I'd walk off stage and basically someone would put him in my arms. I was like, okay, you can't get more real than this. So it was pretty amazing. And it's funny because now even through Facebook, I see some of the people who, would babysit or would do like little things for me. And I always go, oh, look at that. I remember so much, that person or that student. And, yeah, it certainly has given me a stronger connection to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. So then when you returned to Newfoundland, you've been working since, going from Toronto and I think that although George Brown tries to prepare people for a career in theater in Canada, since it is based in Toronto, a lot of the knowledge comes from the Toronto theater community. What did you find different when you arrived in the theater community in Newfoundland?
Yeah, that was certainly probably in some ways my biggest awakening, but also it wasn't that far from what my expectation was, because when I knew when I came back that I was probably going to be creating a lot of my own work. I didn't quite realize how much, but I did know that I was probably going to be doing a lot of things where I had to write my own work. And that was like the first job I got when I came home. It was a collective. And that was a really big tradition here. It's actually kind of fallen off a lot in the 25 years since, but the first 4 or 5 years that I was back here, I was writing collective works all the time. So that was one thing we hadn't done any work on in George Brown, because of course, yeah, they're preparing you for life as an actor, not to be a writer actor or writer director actor or a producer. So I very quickly realized that if there were stories that had to be told here, I might have to be the one telling them. Now we do, of course, also have some incredible playwrights here, but you might get a job doing one of those productions a year, and the rest of the year I knew I was probably going to have to be creating a lot of my own work. So in the early days in particular, I did a lot of writing. That probably changed a fair bit, I'd say within 7 or 8 years, because people started getting more into the Canadian model, where there was a playwright or co-writers. And now it's almost entirely single writer shows. But in the beginning, yeah, that was a big awakening, was realizing I'm going to have to write too. But it was also, a beautiful thing, because I had such freedom to be able to create my own characters for those shows.
It's interesting because when we were in theater school, they couldn't know how integral the self-created theater was going to be, how important, how big the indie scene was, the do-it-yourself theater scene was going to be. They were preparing us for what the common experience was at the time.
Yeah, like you go and audition for Stratford and Shaw and all these big companies, and the regional companies too. Like that was really what I kind of had the impression my career was going to be, until Luke was born. And that did change my worldview. And I thought, I am going to need to be working a lot more than I would have had the liberty to. And I thought, I can't be out, working as a waitress to support myself while I beat the streets and audition, because I knew I had a child to support. So that was actually one of the things that led me back home. Even though it had always been my intention to come home after theater school, like when I left to go, and I thought I'd always come back. But, as you get into the training, like you said, like you're being prepared for a different kind of industry. And so I really started going down that road. Having Luke changed it all again. And I went, oh, okay, I'm going to go home. and I don't regret it for a second, because like I said, I basically arrived here with a job within a couple of days. And I've never had to take a job outside the industry.
That's pretty miraculous.
Yeah, it is a miraculous. It's a beautiful thing. I've worked in film. I've done tons of different kinds of jobs within theater and film. But yeah, I'm really lucky. I don't know how.
You started your own theater company there as well?
I did, yeah. So about 10 years in, I started a company called White Rooster Theater. I kind of had a meeting of the minds with someone who's become a really good friend, Sherry White, and we started working together on a show and just, fell in love with each other's way of working. And I knew, okay, I'd found someone that I could probably forge a career with. So we started writing a show together. And at least we thought that in order to produce it, we were going to have to start a company. So we blindly went in, incorporated this company, and we didn't even have a name for it. So when we were, when we finally had to put the application in, we were like, well, what are we going to call this? We came up with all kinds of corny names. And I said, well, we got to call it something. And she said, well, what? And I said, well, let's just use our names. And so her last name was White. And I was like, no, White Lawrence, White Ruth, that doesn't sound right. And I went, oh, well, my friend Shane Marie Kasner used to call me Rooster as a nickname. She said, yeah, perfect, White Rooster, call it that. And the irony about that company, it's called White Rooster Theater. And its mandate is to produce the works of women playwrights. It didn't, the irony of it being a rooster did not hit us for some time after. But then we kind of liked it. We thought, oh yeah, well, okay, that's unexpected. So yeah, we have our own theater company, and now it's going into its 16th year. We tour across the country. We've taken on the development of a couple of really great playwrights, and we've been really privileged to do the work of other incredible playwrights. 2 years ago, we produced Catherine Banks's Governor General Award-winning play, It Is Solved by Walking. And that was her second GG award. And I felt so privileged to have the opportunity to co-produce that and to be in it. So, we've actually, by focusing our mandate on women, we've had some great opportunities come our way.
That's great.
Yeah. And, we get Canada Council funding on a regular basis now. And, we're doing okay. We're still project by project, which is okay. In this climate, I think I prefer it. But yeah, we work a lot. We do at least one production a year and usually some development as well.
And it does, just because I'm always fascinated by the way that a small company manages to fund its work. Do you do all of your work through Canada Council? Do you have sponsors? Do you do crowdfunding?
We don't. I have to say, the one thing that I really wish we had a better grounding in here is corporate funding, and we really have so little. It's actually shocking. So we are pretty much publicly funded. We get funding from Canada Council, from our Newfoundland Labrador Arts Council. We have a city funding. We also have another government program that sometimes contributes. And then besides that, it's ticket sales, some advertising, and we do some crowdfunding, but not often, because everyone seems to be at that these days. And it's just a little harder to go out and look for the money when everybody's kind of asking all the time.
Yeah.
So so far so good. We've always managed to make our budget. We've never yet been in a position where we couldn't pay people what we promised we pay them. We pay national standard for, I think, every position that we hire. It just means that sometimes we do smaller projects. So we don't always, we just did a 5-person show. That's our biggest show ever. Usually it's a 2-person show. So it just limits the scope of the project sometimes, but it never limits the creativity.
No, sometimes I find that when you have a limitation, like a limited budget, you have to get more creative in how you're going to produce. And that can lead you in places that you never would have been able to go if you had all the money that you might want. Yeah,
that's right. And actually it's meant that that a lot of times there's a certain beauty that comes out of it. Like a few years ago, I was doing a show, and I realized that the only place I could possibly cut my budget was in the materials. And I thought, okay, I don't want to cut the designer, but I'm very limited in what I can spend on materials. And so I was looking at this show and I thought, what? like, how are we going to do this? Because I also knew that I wanted to tour it. So I had a chat to the designer, and I said, okay, how about we try this? How about we just agree right now that we're going to do this whole play and we're not going to have any wood anywhere on stage. And the designer, sort of thought that over for a few seconds because, it was a good designer. And she said, yeah, okay. I don't know if I can make that work, but I'm willing to try. And it was actually a big set because it was a show about Stockholm Syndrome, and the main character was a young girl who was captured, not unlike the novel Room that came out like a year after we did our show. And so she had to create a space where a girl was being held captive without using any wood. And she did it. It was extraordinary. She used aluminum framing from a projector and wool. So she made the frame of the house, and then she used wool like a spider's web to do the walls. And I thought that was just brilliant. And she sold me. And so now my motto for the theater company, I guess you'd call it my kind of go-to motto is no wood. And that's where I start every design conversation from now.
That's interesting.
So yeah, it's and you know what, Phil? It's actually meant that we have put off some extraordinary shows. Now, we do use wood when we need it. Obviously, like, it's pretty hard to have furniture, like a table, and not have wood. But I always ask that they make it not their first choice. So it's it's just meant that we've had some pretty interesting set designs, and we've been able to tour everything. The last show we did, the conversation with the designer, because there was 5 people in it, I said, okay, I'm going to pay you this design fee. The more we can take out of this set, the happier I'm going to be with this production. So she started with kind of a set design in mind, and we just all worked together, her, the director, and the cast, to say, okay, can we get rid of that? We don't need it. Okay, let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of this. So by the time we were done, everything fit in the pan of a truck. And it was, again, it was meant to be a kitchen sink drama, really. And we had no walls. We had some curtains and a couple of pieces of furniture, but it was really just a process of elimination. We went into it taking things away. And every day we started out with a whole bunch of props, and every day we took something away. We said, can we do without that? Yeah. And we just got rid of it. So by the time we actually did the show on stage, everything that was on that stage was essential. Everything. There was not one decorative piece that wasn't used. So it's been a really good experience from that perspective too.
I can definitely see the how. Well, I mean, I was thinking about when everything is absolutely necessary. I've seen we've all seen so many sets that are comprised of things that they look good, or they set the scene, but you could do without them.
Oh my God. I feel like I watch most shows. I go into a theater and I look at the set, and I sometimes just have a visceral reaction. And I go, what they could have done with that money besides this. Cause I feel like I don't need it most of the time. I just need the actors, to be honest, like maybe it's the point in life that I'm at, but I just want to really feel what those actors are feeling. And sometimes I can imagine things that I just don't need to see them, I remember.
Yeah, I do know.
Yeah. And the other funny experience that we had, this is one of our first touring experiences. We took a small show, 3-person show across Canada went from Newfoundland to Winnipeg. So not quite all the way across, but again, it was one of those things of like narrowing down. Sherry White directed the production. It was written by a Toronto writer named Shannon Bramer. And we actually played it at the Fringe in Toronto, and we got sort of noted as best ensemble by Glenn Sumi and John Kaplan. So we were pretty chuffed by that. So everything traveled in one suitcase, one garbage container, because it was a set piece and a whole bunch of stuff could fit in it. And and one cardboard box. And I remember when we arrived in Winnipeg and the stuff started coming out on the carousel, we were at one end like of the carousel in the airport, and we could see like all the people that were gathered around the carousel over on the far end where the stuff was starting to come out. Like it was almost like watching a domino or something, because we could see all the people like looking, and their heads would turn and they'd look at each other and they'd giggle and they'd chat like as something was coming along this conveyor belt. And we were kind of like, what's going on? It was like this just little like wave of giggles that was kind of going in this really odd shape around this airport. I think it was like an M-shaped conveyor belt. And by the time we could see it, we realized, oh my God, it's our garbage can that had been painted blue and, it was all taped up. And people were like laughing at the fact that there was a piece of luggage that was a steel garbage container. And we were like, oh my God, we're at the end of the conveyor belt. And we too, of course, were starting to giggle by now. And then we realized, okay, this is the moment. We've got to pick it up. So two of us reached in and grabbed the garbage can and put it on the floor. And the whole airport applauded. We're like, we just stood up on the edge of the conveyor belt and went, if you like the performance of our garbage can, please come to the Can West Center from Thursday to Saturday, and you can see Mona Rita, in which this garbage can has a starring role. And of course they applauded again. And we were like, oh, well, that was like, on the spot Fringe marketing right there. Yeah.
So you took that show to the Winnipeg Fringe as well as the Toronto Fringe?
It actually wasn't the Winnipeg Fringe. It was FemFest. We got invited to FemFest. So we did Toronto Fringe, Hamilton Fringe, and the Atlantic Fringe. And then we did a date in St. John's, and we did one in Winnipeg. And I think that was the 5 cities on our tour.
Did you go in that order? Because that's sort of like a circular.
It was all over the place. Yeah, we did. We started. That's exactly it. We went St. John's, Toronto, Hamilton, Winnipeg, Halifax, back to St. John's again. It was a very strange tour.
Well, you do them in the order that they come in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but we had a ball. It was one of those things where we met so many people. And the funny thing that came out of that was that after we had done that tour, a couple of years later, I just to try it out, I did a Groupon sale thing on one of our shows. Like, I think we had 4 shows, and I said, okay, this one night, like the preview night or something, I'm just going to do a Groupon for. So, we sold all the tickets for $10. We got $5. And I did it because I thought, okay, I want to get a good crowd out for the show. But then I also was really keen to get my hands on some audience demographics, just to kind of see like who's coming to the show, and obviously they're not willing to spend that much money, but I thought, okay, these are the people who are curious about our company. And when I got the demographics back, I was shocked, because this was like about 2.5 years, maybe 3 years after we'd done that tour. And I have no idea how and why, but when the tickets were bought, we noticed that there were tickets sold out of Winnipeg. They were bought in Winnipeg and Toronto, Hamilton, Vancouver for some reason, and 2 or 3 places in Nova Scotia. And we went, oh my God, like those are all the places we've been with shows in the past. So somehow or another, I don't know if people who had seen us up there were now living in St. John's or were going to be vacationing here. They saw the Groupon and they bought tickets to come see the show. So it really proved to me the power of touring and kind of building that national audience, because, the person who sees you in Winnipeg this year might be in St. John's next year and are going to come and check you out. So It was enlightening. Yeah,
Yeah, I remember doing Fringe when I was on the Fringe tour. There were people who had in a couple of the cities that we were in. They'd been there before, and they were commenting on how valuable it was to do that first year, maybe struggle through that first year,
hmm
and maybe if the first half of their Fringe festival in say Calgary didn't go very well, but then the second half went better as word got out, and then when they came back the next year, how many people sought them out and came right from the start
Yeah,
just because of the
exactly.
before.
I know, and you can never predict. Like we had such great audiences in Toronto. We were so like, we got word got out early about us because we had a good review, and people were coming. We were in the Bathurst Street Theater, so we had great
Mm.
space and nice and central. And we were so spoiled. It was our first Fringe, and we were like, "Wow, this is so great!" Lots of people were coming out. Then we went to Hamilton. We were dead in Hamilton. Like no one was coming out, and it was a heat wave. Like outdoors in Hamilton, it was like being in a firebox at a stove. Like oh, it was unbelievable. The Salvation Army was actually going around handing out water to people on the street because the heat was so high, and no one was coming out at night.
How long
And
ago was that?
that was 20. Was it 2011? I think it might have been 2011. I feel like it was about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh boy, it was just, well, I'll tell you, Kim's Convenience was playing in the same theater that we were in at Bathurst.
Mm-hmm.
We saw everything that played alongside of us. And I think we also benefited a bit from that too, because they were getting amazing crowds when we would go on after them. And so people were, coming to see our show.
You get the people who couldn't get tickets to Kim's Convenience, which is, it's a good spot to be in that following a hit show.
Absolutely. Like, and we went to see it. We're like, oh my God, like they had sold out for very good reason. It was a great show. And we were like, wow, like these guys are packing them in. But we were also kind of benefiting from that. So we didn't do badly by being, by being there close at hand to them. Proximity really helped us. And then when we went to Hamilton, we were in a non-air conditioned theater, or actually, I think the air conditioning broke in the theater that we were in. It was kind of a makeshift theater. And we went out one night to do it, and they said the air conditioning broke. And we said, okay, we're not performing. They go, well, there's 8 people here who really want to see it. Sarah Tilly and I looked at each other. She was my co-performer, and I said, oh my God, 8 people? We're going to die in this heat.
Yeah. And
we said, okay, look, tell them we'll give them free tickets to come tomorrow. Like, we just can't perform in this. And the stage manager came back and she said, well, 6 of them can't come back, and they've heard great things. They really want to see it. So we did the show. And honestly, Phil, the only thing I can remember from that whole experience that night was watching the sweat drop off of Sarah's face and feeling it going down my back in a river. I was like, I don't even remember anything about the show except how hot it was. So that was that experience. But having said that, it was really nice to know that there was at least 6 people who wanted to see the show so badly that they weren't going home until
that's good.
Yeah, so that was.
I remember doing, I think it was in Edmonton, doing the play that we were touring, which was a play in the style of a silent film. So we're all in whiteface.
Oh yeah.
And they would turn the AC off when the show would start,
right?
Just so that. Because of the noise, which makes sense. But the theater that we were in was like this serious furnace.
Oh.
So we would have these lights, and we're already caked on with white makeup, and we'd finish and just sort of see how much did my makeup stay on, whether it looked at the white splotches on the stage from where the makeup came off.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Oh wow! Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't envy that at all. Yeah. And I mean, we're spoiled here because, apart from the occasional warm day, we just don't have that experience really, even in the middle of summer. So I don't have to face the heat and humidity of a theater very often, but I do remember that. And boy, that was a tough one.
One of the things that we in the Toronto indie scene people talk about a lot is where's the audience going. People
Yeah.
are, they see the audience going, the Mervish theaters, you've got the big shows,
Mm.
and you've got Factory Tarragon, Pass Marais still struggling for their audience, but scraping by. And everybody's sort of wondering what is happening, like for indie theater, where is our audience? And do you find that, I picture, and maybe I'm wrong, but I picture the Newfoundland culture as being more friendly to the arts, and the arts being more integral than they are here.
Mm.
Is that a false? Is that my seeing Newfoundland as the promised land for the arts, or is that?
Well, it's an interesting dilemma, because if you talk to people here, a lot of them will say the same thing. Like, what we're seeing right now is definitely, it's a proliferation of musicals, the big shows. Those are the ones, it's the amateur and the semi-pro shows that are in the biggest theaters here. And the professionals are in the smallest theaters, because we're having the hardest time getting people come out to see drama, comedy, doesn't matter what it is. Like, if it's not a musical, it's harder to get an audience. And for a while there, I actually thought, oh, it's cost. And then I realized, no, like, they're paying, even here, like, now I know this is probably a cheap ticket in Toronto, but like here, they're paying like anywhere from $60 to $100 to go see a big musical. And yet the theater companies were charging between $20 and $35 for a ticket, which is like, that's cheap theater by most accounts. But here we were like, no, it's the cost. Like, people aren't coming to see it because of the cost. And so I thought, no, that's got to go out the window. We can't be thinking it's the cost, because, the public funding is subsidizing these tickets. So yes, if you want to see good theater, you're going to have to come and pay for it. But yeah, I'd say that we're having similar dilemmas here. And part of what's happening too is that we're losing a lot of performers that used to just make their home here and work here only. Now they're starting to move out more often. So like, when I was casting the show that I did in November, we started casting, and out of 5 performers, we had to bring in, now they were Newfoundland performers, but they were living away. We had to bring 3 out of 5 in from away, which, made a significant cut into my budget, because I had to travel them, put them up, and do the best I could to provide like per diems and stuff for them. So that really has changed a lot of the way we're doing things here. There's definitely less professionals who are starting companies. We're still around, but not many others have like kind of followed in our path. There's only a few. Artistic Fraud is one of the big companies, a little bit older than us. I think they're 20 years old now. And, they're still based out of here. But from the beginning, they've always taken their work on the road. They kind of develop it, get it ready here, and then they take it on the road. And that's really the model that I've followed for the last 5 or 6 years. Is I said, okay, well, like, we got to do what they're doing. We have to develop the work here and then go find our audience, because we do have some audience here, but it's not big enough to sustain the company. In fact, I am doing a show right now that is going to open on Thursday night. And at the moment, like, we don't really have that many tickets sold. Now, we've got a guaranteed fee because it's a show where we've done before and it's being presented, but we still want people to come out and see that show. We want the theater that we're performing for to have a good audience, to do a box office that's worthy of having presented us. But it's like, we're struggling to figure out, okay, where is that audience? Where are they going? What are they going to see? And how do we get them in our seats?
Has there been a change? Like,
has there been
a change? Did they used to come and then they have stopped coming?
I would say more so. Yeah. Like, now, not when I first came home 25 years ago, it was still, you had to work hard to get people in. It got better when the economy here got better. People went out more, that's for sure. But in the last 3 or 4 years, it's harder to get audiences. We like White Rooster, I feel like, is in a good position because we do have a good, strong, loyal audience. They know that when they come see one of our shows, it's going to be good quality. They're going to see good performers. What they're getting for their money, they feel confident in. So I feel a little bit like that makes it a bit easier. But, you know, even if like, I want people to go out and see the emerging artists too, because if you're not going out and taking your chance on seeing that emerging artist, well, that emerging artist is not going to stick around to become the established artist in 5-10 years. So there's sort of a bit of a vacuum being created because right now a lot of the younger performers just aren't sticking around. They're taking other jobs or they're leaving the province altogether. So I really see that. I'm not exactly sure where it's going. So it's interesting when I heard you talk about that, I thought, I would not have thought that in Toronto. But it's obviously, similar situation everywhere, maybe.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Well, also, I mean, those big shows, number one, they have an advertising budget. So people get to learn about those shows.
Yeah, that's right.
In an easier way.
Yeah.
And
it's like a big blockbuster. A big blockbuster gets millions of people out on a weekend because they've got the money to put into the advertising, and the small independent film doesn't have that money. So, you know, exactly. It's a similar dilemma, that's for sure.
And what is the show that you're working on right now?
Funny you should ask. We started talking about Luke. Okay, so the show that I'm doing right now is called Stable Home: Life with Two Horses. And it's a show that Luke and I developed, created, and we perform together. And we perform as ourselves. So we got the idea a couple years ago. We were both born in the year of the horse. And in 2014 was the year of the horse. I turned 48. Luke turned 24. I was exactly double his age. And I remember saying to him, hey, from now on, like I actually get younger in relation to you. This is really good. The ratio starts changing because I've always been so much older than you. And we sort of joked about it a bit. And I said, I said, I feel like we've got a lot of stories from, you know, the way he was raised, kind of unconventionally. And he was a bit of he's a very individualistic person. Luke is a stand-up comedian now and has been for about 4 years. So, you know, he's developed his own career, but along the way, you know, he had lots of challenges. He had a learning disability. So all through school, that was a challenge. And it just made for a lot of kind of interesting experiences. So we started talking one day and we were kind of trading some stories. And I said, I know about this show, which I didn't get to see. I said, I know about this show in Toronto, created by Ravi Jain, called A Brimful of Asha. And I said, and he did a show where he wanted to do this solo show about his arranged marriage. And he told his mom he was going to do this show. And she said, well, you can't do that show because you won't be telling the whole truth. And he said, that doesn't matter. You know, you probably know the show. Do you know the show I'm talking about?
I know of the show.
Yeah. And so his mom said, you're not going to do that show on your own. If you do, I'm going to come and I'm going to tell people the truth. And I thought, wow, that's really brave and really scary. So Luke and I started talking about it. And I said, yeah, you know, if we did that, that feels like kind of an interesting experience. And I wonder what would happen. So we enlisted Lois Brown, who's a very great friend of mine and a colleague since I came home. She's a dramaturg and a director. I work with her all the time. And I said, Lois, we're thinking about this show. Well, she had seen Brimful of Asha, loved the show. And she said, oh my God, okay, it'll be nothing like that, but it'll be exactly like that. That's what we're going to do. We're going to tell the truth. That's going to be my challenge to you. So we started writing this show. And as we told Lois some stories, because that's kind of how we did it more in Luke's stand-up tradition. So we started telling stories. And then there were times I'd tell a story and Luke would go, that's not actually what happened. This is actually what happened. And I could not believe some of the truth behind some of the stories that I thought I'd known for, 20 years. And I was like, oh my God. And he started, I guess we both kind of started doing this confessional type thing of like, okay, this was really what was happening, or this is what I was trying to protect you from. So we ended up coming up with, oh my God, I think in the end we decided on about 24 to 28 stories. And then when we ran them all, the show was too long. So Lois said, okay, well, we can't have this many stories. You guys have to pick some. And our favorites were different. We couldn't decide. I said, well, Lois, like, how about we let the audience choose what stories they want to hear? And so now we have 2 wood horses on stage that we use just as our like kind of seats that we sit on when one or the other is telling the story. And we have a bucket, nice little horse feed bucket. And inside that are a whole bunch of cards with titles of stories that sometimes tell you nothing about what the actual story is going to be, but they're our cue. And so we let the audience pick, do you want to hear about cats or do you want to hear about the Pope turkey? And so we let the audience choose, and then we sort of trade off the stories as the night goes on. We have a couple of stories we tell together, but mostly Luke has a story, I have a story, or we have one that we go, wait, that's not what happened. So it's a pretty neat format for the show. We almost think of it like a game show, because sometimes we also ask the audience some questions like, oh yeah, from what we've told you so far, like what would you think is the best parenting tip you could give us? Or what do you think was the worst moment of what you've seen so far? And people, the thing is, sometimes because of the way the audience chooses the stories, some nights the show feels really like raunchy and edgy, and other times it feels kind of sweet and nice. I like the sweet and nice ones, and the raunchy and edgy ones always make me really nervous because I always think, oh, I seem like such a horrible person and a really bad mom. But that was kind of part of the challenge. We just took it on and said, okay, well, if we're going to do this, then we just had to face being honest with each other and kind of exposing some of our faults. Both of us get really nervous before the show because of that.
Yeah. You said it opens this week?
Yeah, it opens on Thursday night at the LSPU Hall. So we're going to run it for four shows. We have 1 matinee and 3 night shows.
Okay. Wow. Great.
Yeah.
And then what do you have after that?
Well, actually, so right after that, there's a Women's Work Festival, which is a festival that I co-founded and I coordinate. And that's a festival of plays in progress that happens in St. John's. It's in its 10th year now. And it's all new works by women, usually from across the country. This year we have 1 coming in from Nova Scotia and 2 local ones. But it's also our 10th anniversary celebration. So we've commissioned 10 writers with Newfoundland roots, but who live across Canada, to write 10 short pieces for us. And it's a full week of development workshops and readings of new plays. And then the week after that, I'm doing another show. This is all in the LSPU Hall. It's a crazy month there for me. I'm doing another show called Bonnie and Clyde, which was written by Adrienne Yearwood of Toronto, and it's directed by Victoria Fuller from St. John's, and they're being presented down here. So rather than bring their whole huge cast down, they've cast 4 people locally, and I get to play Kumi Barrow, who is Clyde Barrow's mother in Bonnie and Clyde.
Nice.
I'm really looking forward to that. It's a big month for theater. I work a lot, but I don't always work this much on stage.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a great month.
Well, we're about at the end of our time here. Thank you so much for coming on, and I really appreciate it.
It was a real pleasure. And actually, Phil, it's actually really good. I find when I'm out here working in Newfoundland, it's only when I tour things or when I visit Toronto and I talk to, my theater compatriots that I really kind of get a temperature of what's happening in the rest of Canada. And we often do feel like we're kind of working, by ourselves, but it sounds like we actually have a lot more, similar challenges, and maybe hopefully the rewards are similar too, because I know that, I do have my days when I go, oh boy, where's all this going and where's this leading? But the truth of it is, I've actually had a pretty solid career, and I've gotten to work with some amazing people in the last 25 years. So who knows what the next, 15 or 20 is going to bring if I hang in there.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to hear from you. Really great to keep up with you on social media. And thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you for an hour.